This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, FBI leaders aiding and abetting terrorists. What an honor and privilege to have with us tonight. Again, John Guandolo, back by popular demand. He is a former FBI agent and president of Understanding the Threat. John, what an honor to have you back on the Glazov Gang.
Thanks, Jamie, as always. I really appreciate being on.
Thank you, John. And as always, you're on top of all the new disturbing stuff happening. And tonight, I want to focus in on something that you've been, covering for a long time, but you're centering in on lately once again. FBI aiding and abetting terrorists. Very strange stuff that's been going on with the Dar al-Hijra Mosque Islamic Center. Tell us about it.
Well, the Dar al-Hijra Islamic Center is in Falls Church, Virginia. It is one of the leading terrorist/jihadi mosques in the United States. It was founded by the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas leaders. The guy who actually signed the deed, Jamal Barzinji, is one of the original Muslim brothers who came to the United States. The property is owned by the North American Islamic Trust, which is the bank for the Muslim Brotherhood, excuse me, which the largest terrorism financing trial in American history demonstrated is not only a Muslim Brotherhood organization, NATE, but is also an organization that funds the terrorist group Hamas. So that's the beginning of the story. And then, of course, in the video we published, we show that the founders, the leaders, the imams, the board members have direct ties to Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood, of course, Al-Qaeda. It's astounding.
Yeah, very disturbing. I want to show a clip of that video later. We got that FBI guy there, and he's hugging the imam, and he just seems so excited. Just a typical fellow traveler, political pilgrim. Very disturbing stuff to watch. Now, in that video, we see this Imam Johari Abdul Malik, bragging about this great relationship he has with the FBI, and he's talking about how the FBI director actually called him when an actual terrorist attack had been stopped by a jihadi that was worshiping at that mosque. Tell us about that.
Yeah, you honestly, you can't make this stuff up. First of all, the guy you're referring to, who's in the mosque in the video, which was this is from 2017, this is just several months ago, is the executive assistant director for the FBI inside this terrorist mosque, completely lauding them and talking about how great they are. Then the imam, as you say, talks about an incident that happened back in 2012 when the jihadi who was going to bomb the Capitol gets arrested. The director of the FBI calls the terrorist imam, Johari Abdul Malik, on his phone and tells him, hey, we know this has nothing to do with Dar al-Hijra, that you don't teach anything like that at your mosque, which is exactly not true. And this brings up the point that this is exactly why these terrorists completely subvert the FBI and bring their leadership in for these hand-holding events, because then they own the FBI leadership as they do, is evidence in this video.
Right. Now, just let's make sure our audience knows where to go. Tell them where they can watch this video, John.
So you can go to, if you go to YouTube and just search Understanding the Threat, our video channel comes up. You can also, and you click it, it's the most recent video. Yeah. You can also, if you subscribe to our newsletter, or which is the best way, it will always be, the link will always be on there as well.
Okay, that's great. So, everybody go to Understanding the Threat on YouTube and watch John Guandolo's videos on everything that's happening. And in terms of this one, it's one of the recent ones. So let me just play a clip here of this FBI individual, Paul Abate. He's so excited standing there, and the imam keeps holding him, touching him with his hand, and then they embrace while they're speaking. Just really creepy stuff. Let me just play a clip of it.
What happened? I said, what? They said there's a guy who was on his way to blow up the Capitol, and he had weapons, and he's supposed to be a Muslim. I said, no, I don't know anything about it. He said, where are you? I said, I'm in the Capitol. Then I got a call from the director of the FBI saying, Imam, we arrested a guy. He prayed Fajr. He prayed Fajr at Dar Hijra that morning. And they arrested him later on his way with the vest and the thing on his way to the Capitol. The chief said, guess what, Imam? He was not being taught that in your masjid. We know that. I said, well, Chief, I would appreciate it if in the press conference you would say that, right? He said, I'll be glad to say in the press conference that this guy that we caught was not a part of the Dar Hijra community. That's huge. How did it happen? Because of a relationship we had. Can you imagine if the director had said, we caught a guy, he prayed Fajr at Dar Hijra, and we caught him on his way to blow up the Capitol, and he didn't say anything else. What do you think it would be like living here? He said, Imam, I know you, I know this community, and that guy, he wasn't radicalized by you. That's the power of our relationship. You can give him a hand.
Just thank you.
I got one more because people. I learned in the meetings with them, maybe something you don't know, but you think it.
And why is he telling the FBI what they're supposed to be doing?
Well, because the FBI relies on leaders like that. These are terrorists. If you watch the whole, for your viewers, if you watch the video we produced from beginning to end, I have yet to have anybody that watched it, and we've just shown it, when we've shown it to different groups of people, including some leaders, they were aghast. One individual who's, we had a sheriff, police chiefs, we showed these gentlemen this, and they just said they were sick to death. And it gives them, by watching this one video, they said it completely explains the behavior of late that they've had with the FBI, which is it appears to law enforcement at the state and local level that they have no idea what they're doing. You look at the Las Vegas shooting, all these other incidents, and this is the explanation. Because as you just demonstrated, they're getting their advice on how to deal with these issues from terrorists.
You know, John, I couldn't help from watching that because throughout my life I've, studied political pilgrims and the fellow travelers. And, we know about the people, that went to Stalin's Russia and they were just in awe, finding utopia there. Fellow travelers to Maoist China, to North Vietnam, and we have these fellow travelers to this day. But this is fellow traveling here. I mean, can you imagine an FBI agent like this all excited hugging a Catholic priest or some Christian pastor or a rabbi? There's something really eerie in that video where, he's just in awe of this jihadi imam.
Yes, and in the end, if you notice at the very end, he says, I yield to you. I yield to you. And yes, he exactly does. When there is evidence up to the ceiling that a mosque and its leadership are terrorists, and the FBI director and the executive assistant director, the number 3 guy for the FBI, are falling over themselves to be their buddy, that to me explains this entire war and why we're losing.
Absolutely. Now, look, let's just look at this Abdul Malik for a minute, because, he presents himself as this really cool guy, and he's for peace and all this stuff. Let's just go back for a minute. At a 2001 conference for the now defunct Islamic Association of Palestine, he called for and supported attacks on, on waging jihad against Israeli infrastructure targets, correct?
Yes, but let's remind your audience, the Islamic Association of Palestine was a Hamas front organization per the U.S. government, per the FBI, the Department of Justice.
Absolutely, absolutely. So they're dealing, and he's dealing with these Muslim Brotherhood front groups.
Yeah, and again, at the time when he did that, that organization was identified as a terrorist front group by the government. I mean, it's amazing. And as a matter of fact, the FBI had identified the Islamic Association of Palestine as a Hamas front group years before Imam Abdul Malik spoke at that conference where he said that.
Right. Okay, now, this imam has recently resigned from this mosque because one of the other imams was caught actually talking truthfully about what Islam teaches. Can you tell us about that?
Well, Shaker El-Sayed is the leading imam there as well. And as a matter of fact, our vice president, understanding the threats, Vice President Chris Gobbets, when he went undercover posing as a Muslim, he actually first went to the Dar al-Hijra, and Shaker El-Sayed, imam, and he's a sheikh, so his name is Shaker El-Sayed, was the imam there. And so this is a guy who was the leader, the president of the Muslim American Society, which both the government and Shaker El-Sayed have publicly said is a Muslim Brotherhood organization. So they've admitted that. Yes, and he calls for and says that female genital mutilation is good to go. Now, the Dar al-Hijra has a lot of issues going on internally. So there's a lot going on there. But from our assessment, Abdul Malik's leaving Dar al-Hijra is more a public facade. It's a show that, well, I need to leave there. But the reality is, as you've demonstrated just in the one incident, he doesn't disagree with that at all. He is all about jihad. He's all about imposing Sharia. He is a jihadi, and he's been a leader at a Hamas mosque, the Dar al-Hijra, for a long time.
No, absolutely. And the hadith, as we know, in Abu Dawood, in Sahih Muslim, and Sahih Bukhari, it's very clear where Islam stands on female genital mutilation and reliance of the traveler, etc. Islamic theology, strongly puts out there that, FGM is the way to go, and this is exactly what the muftis and the clerics and the sheiks point to every time there's an effort to try to get rid of FGM in the Islamic world.
That's right. Not only does Islamic law support it, but in Islamic countries, it's understood that that is acceptable behavior. So we're seeing it practiced in many countries around the world.
Right. So this imam finally resigns when his mosque is caught telling the truth about Islam in terms of female genital mutilation. So, John, what do you make of all this? You're a former FBI agent. We've got this mosque that's operating as a front for Hamas operatives in the United States. Even the U.S. Treasury Department has stated such. It's associated with terrorism, many of its figures connected to terror. And the FBI is sending this individual doing all these hugging sessions. And the FBI chief is actually even calling this jihadi imam, telling him the exact opposite of what his mosque is preaching. You can't make this stuff up, but I guess today we can. What do you make of it?
Well, I think you've got from the FBI director at the time, which was Robert Mueller, who calls this terrorist directly on his phone thinking he's a friend, to the executive assistant director, Paul Abate. Now you look at all that's going on now with the former acting director, Andrew McCabe, senior FBI executives. What you have is criminal negligence at a minimum. You've got gross unprofessional conduct that puts Americans in danger. And this comes down to the FBI not understanding the threat at all. They have no training program at all at any level in the FBI. on the real Islamic threat. FBI agents, as evidenced by their own leaders, are literally outreaching. Look, just to go back, when FBI Director Mueller was questioned by Congressman Louis Gohmert about the Boston Marathon bombing, and he said, Director Mueller, did you know that the Boston Marathon bombers were going to the Islamic Society of Boston, and that the Islamic Society of Boston was founded by the Al-Qaeda guy, Al-Amudi, who the FBI arrested and who pled guilty, was convicted here in the United States. Did you know that he founded that mosque? So an Al-Qaeda guy founded that mosque. Did you know that? And he said no, but not only did he deny, he said, I didn't know that, which is astounding, but he tried to defend himself by saying, we were doing outreach at the mosque before the bombing. And my point is, exactly, that's the problem. That's a jihadi terrorist mosque also. And instead of getting information about real bad guys, they're so busy doing a love fest that people are dead in Boston because of Robert Mueller's unprofessional conduct. And we put doctors and lawyers in jail for that. It's called criminal negligence.
Yes, absolutely, John. Thank you. And as we see, all of this jihad denial is the enabling of jihad. Because when we look back and we look at Fort Hood and the Boston Marathon Massacre and San Bernardino and Orlando, if the Obama administration had allowed a true threat assessment and did not take, you know, the phrases and the references to Islam and jihad out of the intelligence agency manuals, etc., a lot of American lives could have been saved. So in many respects, we see here, as you're saying, how jihad denial is enabling jihad, and the FBI is complicit in this.
Well, I agree with you, and I want to, you just mentioned San Bernardino. So reminding your viewers, right after San Bernardino, Hamas, doing business as the Council on American Islamic Relations, had a nationally televised press conference that was aired on CNN, where literally one of the top Muslim Brotherhood leaders in North America, Muzammil Siddiqui, got up on television and said, we want the police to get to the bottom of this. We want them to find the motive for their attack, so long as they understand Islam had nothing to do with it. As almost verbatim what he said. And that is what our leaders have been doing, honestly, since 9/11, not truly assessing the threat.
So, John, let's end with this. So we see some really disturbing things happening with the FBI. They're sending in their agents to hug these imams and, pat them on the back for doing the exact opposite of what they're doing. The FBI chief is calling this jihadi imam. But now we see that certain figures at the FBI are connected with some other strange stuff going on. So in terms of FISA and the Nunes memo, how would you tie this into some of the disturbing narratives that we see unfolding here?
Well, I appreciate that question. First of all, if we talk about the application or the affidavit, the application for a FISA warrant, the actual process, because I worked at FBI headquarters and was the affiant on many FISA warrants and got many of them signed by judges. And the process, very quickly, is the agent in the field talks with their FBI supervisor, who has to swear out what the agent's telling him is true. So the headquarters supervisor, and in this case, I was acting in that capacity, goes through line by line on this application. And in many cases, it's not unusual for that FISA warrant to be 80, 100 or more pages. So you make sure it's truthful. Then you work with the DOJ attorney and DOJ officials who are required to sign off on it. Then it goes literally to the FBI director. And I can tell you that I personally sat, for instance, in some extenuating circumstances, in the FBI director's home on like a Saturday morning, when he actually had to sit and read through the entire application, sign off on it. Then you've got to go to the FISA judge and sit in their chambers while they read it, go through it, ask you questions, and make sure everything's right. Here's why I share all that. This FISA application that was presented to the FISA judge with regards to the dossier provided by a hard left political guy named Christopher Steele, who the FBI knew was not credible, knew information that they did not include in the application, which including information that the DNC and Mrs. Clinton paid Steele to do this. The FBI knew that. They knew he was not credible. They knew things in the application were not true. And yet the DOJ attorney and the FBI supervisor presented it to the judge as true and factual. That is perjury. That is tampering with a federal election as a part of that. I would argue because it's part of the larger movement, that is sedition. And you could argue because you're a government official, it's treason. Now, that's the magnitude of what we're talking about. And you have senior FBI officials, Mr. McCabe, Andrew McCabe, possibly FBI Director Comey, and definitely based on the information we now have, former President Obama.
John, what do you make of Nancy Pelosi and, and Cory Booker and all these individuals there? Oh, before the memo was released, oh, it's going to hurt national security. It's going to hurt national security. Then the memo's released. There's nothing in there. There's nothing in there. Like, how do those two things add up? It's a threat to national security, then it's released, then there's nothing in there. They have to be held to account on these, this absurd, bizarre lies. They don't fit with each other.
Right. Well, you're expecting a reasonable and rational response from people that are liars and part of the Marxist movement. And certainly those two people you just mentioned are working against the interests of the United States. And you're right, they should be held accountable. I think certainly in the case of Nancy Pelosi, a case could be made that she's committed treason. I think there are others that have committed treason, and I believe they should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Certainly Mrs. Clinton did.
John, in terms of, if we could sum it up in a sentence or two, in terms of the Nunes memo and everything that just happened, what we found out. The Clinton campaign, the Democrats, are enlisting individuals in the FBI and DOJ to wage a war on Trump, to overturn an election, actually to participate in a coup against our elected government and in many respects against America. Is that somewhere a fair assessment?
Yes, legally that's called sedition, conspiring to overthrow the government, treason if you're a government official. And I think the people that are involved and where treason can be proven, I think they should be hanged or executed based on the means that the government decides. I think until we hold people accountable to that level, this behavior is not going to stop. As soon as people understand that their lives are at stake for committing treason against the government, then you're going to see some of this stuff subside. But until that time, you have reports now that as many as a dozen senior FBI officials were meeting together to conspire to work against Mr. Trump's presidency, his agenda, and his national security policies. I mean, that's sedition. I mean, this is unreal. And so I think it is, number one, I think it's much worse than the American people understand right now. And as you've noticed, and as you've just articulated, the more that comes out, the worse it gets. And I think it's going to get a lot worse.
Thank you, John. We live in troubling times. Before we leave, in terms of final words of wisdom, in terms of the FBI and this jihadi imam, in terms of now what's coming out because of this memo, as you as the Buddha of knowledge at the Glazov Gang, how would you sum up everything that's happening?
Well, I think this goes to what Understanding the Threat has been saying for years. At the federal level, and this isn't earth-shattering information, the FBI is broken, the national security apparatus is broken, the counterintelligence apparatus in the United States is broken, and it's at the state and local level that we are going to defend ourselves until a time that hopefully will come sometime in the next 10 years when these the people who are committing sedition and treason are held to account. But it's at the local and state level that the Islamic threat and the Marxist threat in the community has to be dealt with. Understanding the threat is the only organization in America giving citizens and local and state law enforcement tools to identify jihadi and Marxist organizations at the ground level and give states a strategy to dismantle these networks and to go after them using all tools lawfully available to them to do it. And that's what we need to do, county by county, state by state, take America back and put freedom back on the offensive where it belongs.
Thank you, John, and please remind our viewers where they can go to support you and your efforts.
Well, understandingthethreat.com, sign up for our newsletter. We're at Facebook at Understanding the Threat, YouTube Understanding the Threat. We're on Twitter at UTT_USA, and I am at John Guandolo, Guandolo. You can text UTT4, the number 4, USA to 56512. But please join us in this fight because we need all hands on deck right now.
John, thank you for your brave and noble fight for America and for the truth.
Thank you, and thanks for everything you and Annie and your whole team do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining the Glazov Gang this evening. Please remember, we're a fan-generated program. If you support and like what we do, please go to jamieglazov.com to support the show and make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel of the Glazov Gang. Good night.